The lawyer-ass voice trembled as he read aloud, "To my children and grandchildren, I leave you nothing." Gasps filled the room, faces twisted in disbelief, anger, and grief. My eldest daughter clutched her chest as if I had struck her from beyond the grave. My grandson, who once swore he'd care for me in my old age, shouted, "This can't be real." But it was. I had taken every dime, every acre of land, every heirloom, and locked them away from the very family I'd nurtured. They thought I'd lived for them, but the truth was darker. They didn't know about the nights I cried alone, the betrayals I endured in silence, the hidden accounts they never imagined. I left behind more than just emptiness. I left behind a secret that would tear open every wound and force them to see who I really was. I was the backbone of my family. For decades, I rose before dawn, worked double shifts, and returned home only to cook, clean, and guide my children. My hands were rough from scrubbing floors, my back bent from years of labor, but my heart overflowed with love. I taught them to pray before meals, to respect their elders, to never forget where they came from. We didn't have much, but I made sure no child of mine went hungry. Birthdays were celebrated with cakes I baked from scratch. Christmas meant secondhand gifts wrapped with care. When my children grew, I stood by them through heartbreaks, marriages, divorces, and disappointments. I raised not only them, but also my grandchildren, rocking them to sleep while their parents chased dreams I had no time to dream. I sacrificed, I gave, I endured. And for years I believed they loved me for it. But slowly, I began to notice the cracks. A missing visit here, an unreturned phone call there. My sacrifices were taken for granted, my wisdom dismissed as outdated. They wanted the fruits of my labor, but never the roots of my struggle. Still, I stayed silent. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We swallow our pain and smile. We keep the family together even when the glue is wearing thin. What they didn't know was that every sacrifice came with a cost, and that I had already decided how the final chapter of our story would be written. The days leading up to my funeral looked ordinary from the outside. I cooked my favorite dishes, collard greens seasoned just right, cornbread fresh from the oven, sweet potato pie that filled the house with warmth. My children and grandchildren gathered around the table, laughing, sharing stories, and snapping pictures for social media. They never realized those meals were my goodbyes. I watched them carefully. My eldest son, Samuel, talked more about his new car than asking about my health. My daughter Clarissa scrolled her phone under the table, barely glancing at the food I'd spent hours preparing. My youngest grandson, Malik, ran through the house without so much as a kiss on my cheek. I smiled through it all. I had learned how to hide disappointment. To them, I was just grandma, always there, always giving. But deep down, I wondered, if I were gone tomorrow, would they remember me for who I was, or only for what I left behind? There were moments, small and fleeting, when my heart ached. Once, I asked Clarissa to drive me to the doctor's office. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said, "Can't you ask someone else? I'm busy." Another time, I gave Samuel money to help pay his rent. He promised to pay me back. He never did. Malik once shouted, "Grandma, you're old. Stop nagging me." He laughed afterward, but the sting remained. Still, when family dinners came, I put on my apron, set the table, and made sure everyone was fed. Love was my duty. Service was my language, even when theirs was neglect. On the night before my passing, I prayed quietly in my room. I asked God to forgive me for the anger hidden deep in my heart. But I also asked for strength to do what I had already set in motion. My family thought they knew me. They didn't. Because while they slept soundly, waiting for the future I had promised them, I had already written the will that would shatter everything. And none of them were ready for what was coming. The church had barely finished echoing with the last hymn when my children, with their tear-stained faces, rushed to the lawyer's office. They weren't rushing for memories. They weren't rushing for closure. They were rushing for inheritance. They sat around the polished oak table, pretending to comfort each other, but their eyes darted toward the thick envelope the lawyer carried. My portrait still hung fresh in their minds, lying in that casket, but the greed in their hearts drowned out grief. The lawyer cleared his throat. This is the last will and testament of Evelyn Johnson. Silence fell. The air grew heavy. The lawyer began. To my beloved family. Smiles broke across their faces. Some reached for each other's hands. They were ready to hear how much money, how many acres, how many heirlooms would soon be theirs. I leave you. Nothing. Gasps filled the room. What? Samuel jumped from his chair, fists clenched. Read that again. Clarissa's eyes widened, mascara smudging. This can't be right. She loved us. She wouldn't. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Johnson was very clear. She instructed that all her savings, her house, her land, and even her jewelry were placed in trust, not for her children or grandchildren, but for causes she personally selected. Malik's voice cracked. Grandma wouldn't do this to us. I was her favorite, the lawyer continued, his tone unshaken. She left a detailed letter explaining her choice. She said, and I quote, I gave you all my love while I lived, but in my death, I cannot reward your neglect. You took my sacrifices for granted. You counted my money before you counted my tears. So I leave you nothing, because nothing is what you gave back. The room erupted. Samuel slammed his fist on the table. Clarissa sobbed into her hands. Malik cursed under his breath. The family that once smiled over cornbread and sweet potato pie now tore each other apart in rage and disbelief. She can't do this! We're her blood! Samuel shouted. But she had done it. The lawyer explained the trust in detail. Scholarships for underprivileged children, donations to the local church, funds for a women's shelter. Every cent, every ounce of sweat she had poured into her life would not be theirs. Clarissa screamed, So strangers get everything and we're left with nothing? The lawyer looked up. Mrs. Johnson said strangers showed her more kindness in her final years than some of her own family ever did. The words landed like knives. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that the will also held a hidden truth, a secret sealed until the very last page. And it was a secret that would explain everything. The lawyer unfolded the final letter. His voice softened. There is something else Mrs. Johnson wanted you to know. The room, still buzzing with anger, fell silent. In her younger years, Evelyn worked 3 jobs. But one night, after a shift cleaning offices, she found a young girl shivering outside the bus station. The child had been abandoned. Evelyn took her in for the night, fed her, and clothed her. That little girl grew into a woman who never forgot her kindness. Confusion spread across the table. What does this have to do with us? Clarissa snapped.